The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show, the last show of the week. That's hard to believe. Enjoyed the day off yesterday. I actually took the opportunity to watch the video presentation of the program. Richard, of course, filled in, and he was telling me about some pretty positive statistics that we're getting back from YouTube, both with the live stream and then also just viewing the video after the fact. And then on top of that, it's a pretty nice studio as far as studios go, and we got a new camera. So it was nice to just relax a bit and to view him doing the program yesterday, talking about exciting things like dishwashers, I think it was, and he goes on his rant for dishwashers and gets a lot of feedback because of it. And as I was telling Sam this morning, I'll have to talk more about things that are near and dear to my heart. Like I said the other day, this beautiful, beautiful, look at this. If you're watching the YouTube stream right now, it's a beautiful two-tiered bird feeder created by the one and only Christopher Eames. And I just set it out there yesterday. And this picture right here, you can see three little birds on there. I think they're called blue tits with a nice blue scalp and multicolored everywhere else. I mentioned the nuthatch. That's also a frequent visitor to the two-tiered bird feeder. And sometimes magpies are quite a bit bigger than those birds you see there in the shot. And then also probably the most beautiful, gorgeous little robins. They're not quite as courageous as these birds that you see here. They don't seem to mind that it's right in front of my office window and I have my lights on and they can see me in there working. But they seem like they're becoming more and more comfortable with eating right outside my back door. So it's nice to be able to view that as the workday unfolds. And they're also pretty hungry, even when it's cold and dreary and almost dark outside. I guess they have to eat just like the rest of us. So the sun, when it comes out, it usually brings them out in full force. But I've been amazed these past 2 days. It's been drizzly and cold outside. There's a beautiful shot of a robin. You see how, we have the restaurant in the United States called Red Robin. It's actually orange. There's an orange patch at the front of a robin, but a beautiful little bird. Well, I better carry on. We have lots to get to on today's program. Besides dishwashers, Richard talked about just the crushing debt that we're piling on top of ourselves. The United States and Britain leading the way with all of this deficit spending, all of this spending on social programs. Earlier this week, the Senate approved a $1.4 trillion spending monstrosity. And it had overwhelming support, both sides of the aisle. You think about how deeply divided Congress is right now in the United States. Just right down the line. As partisan of an impeachment as you could imagine, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in this segment. And yet here, when it comes to spending trillions of dollars, nobody stands up to it. Nobody sounds the alarm. Well, there's maybe a few. I've got a clip here from Ted Cruz. We'll play that in a second. But where are the conservatives? The fiscal conservatives? Answer, they don't exist anymore. $1.4 trillion. It was split up into two bills, and I'll explain the reason for that in just a second. But the first one went through 71-23. This is the Senate vote. And then the second one went through 81-11. You see, with impeachment, it's right down party lines. But with this, it's unanimous, nearly. 81-11. This bill, this omnibus bill, it was split into two spending bills because the president had previously said that he would not approve another omnibus monstrosity. That's what he keeps receiving on his desk. So what Congress did, instead of presenting one big monstrosity, they split it up into two and then passed both of those along so that by the letter of the law, they'll be pleasing what this president wants. This is what Mike Lee had to say. He's one of the few that voted against it. Leaders and appropriators have cleverly put the negotiated spending agreement into two bills so that we can all pretend that it's better than just one, even though they were negotiated at the same time, released to the public at the same time, and will be voted on within minutes of each other. $1.4 trillion. Here's what Senator Ted Cruz had to say about this bill that they received just this week, 2,000 pages. I guess they have to study through all of that in addition to everything else that's going on. 2,000 pages, as if any of them read it. And then it had a nice, overwhelming majority. Ted Cruz said this, clip one.
This week, the Senate is expected to vote on two massive omnibus spending bills that are just disgraceful. It's $1.4 trillion being spent, over 2,000 pages. We were just given this 24 hours ago. Nobody's actually read the substance, and it's an example of why the national debt, why our debt is spiraling out of control, because this was a deal cut in the back room between Republican leadership and Chuck Schumer, and it grows the government and without putting any meaningful checks on it.
And it's like that here in the UK as well, as Richard brought out on yesterday's program. The state opening of Parliament, the government laying out the new government. This is the majority now. Boris Johnson, he's got a comfortable majority in Parliament. And he's laying out his plans for the next 5 years or so. He's talking about a new golden age. He says that his Queen's speech, it's going to be as radical as anything we've seen in a generation. And of course, as we covered with you last week and even earlier this week, there's obviously some good changes in place or planned. But listen to what Fraser Nelson says about this so-called new golden age, or this new spending plan. It says the Prime Minister's agenda revealed today is about spending on schools, the health service, scientific research, housing, infrastructure, even the exploration of space. It's a plan not just for the next year, but for the next decade. Quite something for a Tory government, which at the start of last week didn't know if it would survive until Christmas. Well, now it's survived, and there's a temporary resurgence in the short term. I mean, when you're just printing off money like they're doing in the United States, the party might go on for a little while longer. But look at how much we're robbing our oncoming generation of their future, presuming that time were to go on long enough. Fraser says the Queen's speech offered a bulging Santa's sack of goodies, more generous than any offered by any previous Tory minister in history. Spend, spend, spend. He talks about, Mr. Nelson in his column, about how that, as long as you have low interest rates and borrowing is cheap for now, you can get away with it for a time. But what happens when things change? What happens when rates go up? Or what happens when there are curses that set in? Well, we've talked before about debt itself. It's a curse. The king of debt. That's what the president said coming into office. President Trump. You can see our article, April 2018, the king of debt. And all the verses that we've repeated again and again on this program. The short-term gain, all right, you've got all the forecasts for 2020, how it's going to be fantastic, and it probably will be. But what about the long term? What about when curses set in? What about when the resurgence is over? Look at what's happening down in Australia with all of these fires and this oppressive heat wave. Look at how much an entire region can go up in flames, how quickly it can happen. More than 100 fires across the East Coast and New South Wales and Queensland. 7 million acres of land going up in smoke. There's one swath that's as wide, I think, as 37 miles. We've talked a little bit about this before. But the size and the extent of this disaster, and then you put it together with the oppressive heat, it's up over 100. Of course, it's summer down under. And it's as hot as 104 degrees in some places. So far, 8 people have died. I thought it was predictable last night just watching the news here in the UK on Channel 4 as they were talking about all of this and then wanting to put all of the blame on Prime Minister Scott Morrison. He made the mistake of scheduling a vacation at this time of year. And so he's just been criticized up and down because he was away. And he announced today, I guess he's on his way back now, or he cut the vacation short, as if it's his fault. And on this Channel 4 report, by the way, they criticize him. This is here in the UK. And then they have all these so-called experts coming on saying that the cause is climate change. And of course, that's another reason they hate Mr. Morrison, because he's like President Trump. He's cutting back regulations and such, and he's not on board with all the climate change nonsense. So they go after him. That's what they do. They make it about the leader if it's a more conservative individual. You never heard this sort of thing. You certainly didn't. If you have an Obama type in there, and these things have happened, but of course we know from the Bible they're going to intensify, no matter who's leading at the time. Here's the announcement Mr. Morrison made following all the criticism that he's received. Clip 2.
I know Australians understand this, and they'll be pleased I'm coming back, I'm sure. But they know that I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in the control room. That's the brave people who do that are doing that job. But I know that Australians would want me back at this time after these fatalities. There have been such horrendous events that has understandably caused a lot of anxiety, and I deeply regret that.
And so he's got to apologize because he's partly to blame. And then the media carry on saying that, well, really, the bigger issue here is climate change, as if that's the cause of all these curses. That article we had recently, The Unseen Consequence of Climate Change, and Mr. Hilliker, Joel Hilliker, he talks about all the things that we blame it on. The list of global problems being blamed on this single cause is rapidly growing. They include, but are far from limited to, more floods, more droughts, more wildfires, more heat waves, rising temperatures, dropping temperatures, increased tornadoes, stronger hurricanes, rising sea levels, shrinking Arctic sea ice, higher ocean acidity, less drinking water, imperiled, and he goes on and on and on. It's such an easy out, isn't it, for the ideologues to just blame everything on climate change, to not consider what the Bible says about the control that God has on the weather. We never, ever want to look at our own sins. We never even want to consider it. We don't want to consider what the Bible has to say. And speaking of our sins, there's no let up there. Just here in the UK this week, we've had this shocking court case with this UK judge coming out. Well, firstly, if you look at the laws in the UK, it's pretty strict when it comes to firing individuals from any company. I mean, there's more freedom in the United States. If you don't want someone working in your company, then fire them, get rid of them. But it's a little more strict here, not quite as strict here in the UK as it is in Europe. But still, you have to have a pretty good reason if you're going to let someone go. Otherwise, you could be in trouble legally. So this judge this week decided that in the case of one individual, this gal that had a pretty conservative view when it comes to male and female, this judge decided that those legal protections that are there, supposed to be there for everyone, they don't apply to her. Because her conservative views about men and women are too extreme. This lady tweeted out that sex is a biological fact and is immutable. There are two sexes, male and female. Men and boys are male. Women and girls are female. It's impossible to change sex. So her employer fired her for that tweet. And then the judge said that the employer was right to do that. Instead of protecting that woman's right, all she did was state it in a tweet. There's no evidence of any kind of mistreatment of individuals. In fact, she's come out and said she's quite happy if it will offend someone who's said that they're a woman now when they used to be a man. She'll call them by the female name. So no problems whatsoever. She'll cause no problems. And yet because of this tweet, because of this view, here come the judges in the UK, the thought police, straight out of George Orwell's book, saying, you can't think that. You should have been fired. J.K. Rowling, the famous author, she made the mistake of tweeting out her defense of this woman. Her name's Maya Forstater. Rowling, the author, said, dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who will have you, live your best life in peace and security. This is not the most conservative view here. But force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real? I stand with Maya, said J.K. Rowling. And of course, the Twitter mob didn't take too kindly to that. Rowling was one of the top trending items on Twitter yesterday as people were tweeting out how that she's now destroyed their lives because of her transphobia. I was reading through Genesis 19 this morning. And this is that mob that encircled Lot's house when he's visited by these two individuals, these two men. They were actually angels. But they came to the city of Sodom. And Lot said, you better stay overnight in my house. And they said, no, we'll keep carrying on. And he insisted, he pressed them, the Bible said, because he knew there were a lot of crazies in his city. He knew there were a lot of intolerant people in this Sodom and Gomorrah region. Tolerant in the way they tolerated any old evil behavior, but very much intolerant when it came to someone speaking up for the truth. So they gathered around the house of Lot and they said, hey, send us those two men that just showed up. We want to rape them. That's how it's worded in the Moffat translation. King James was a little more squeamish with topics such as that. But that's what they were demanding that. Bring them outside so we can rape them. And then Lot, of course, puts his foot down and says, no, we can't do that. And it says this is the people's response to Lot. They said in verse 9, this is the Moffat translation, the fellow settled among us as a stranger. That's Lot. You'll recall Abraham and Lot, they came in as strangers and they settled into the area. Lot's group got too big to commingle with Abraham, so they spread out. And Lot and his descendants or his family, they took the Jordan Valley, the area in and around the Dead Sea. What is now the Dead Sea because of what God did in Genesis 19. It used to be this lush, verdant garden. But it had all of this perversion going on in those cities, Sodom and Gomorrah. And the people of Sodom, they said, the fellow settled among us as a stranger. I mean, he just is a Johnny-come-lately. He didn't grow up around here. And he would lay down the law for us? Who does he think he is? Who does he think he is to stand up to our lifestyle or our behavior? That's right. Tolerate any evil, deviant behavior at all, except the views of individuals we don't think are thinking the right way. That's intolerable. Listen to, this was at the debate last night, switching back over to the states. This is what Elizabeth Warren said at one point during the Democrat debate. Clip 3.
The transgender community has been marginalized in every way possible. And one thing that the President of the United States can do is lift up attention, lift up their voices, lift up their lives. Here's a promise I make. I will go to the Rose Garden once every year to read the names of transgender women, of people of color who have been killed in the past year.
What is wrong with the thinking of our leaders, of all the tragic deaths happening in the United States every day, every week, every month, every year? And this is high on the list, right up to the Rose Garden. Every year, I'm going to list all of them off. It's so important. You can see why they don't take so kindly to someone, maybe a fellow that came along a little bit later, settled into the community, and then tried to stand up for a godly standard. Well, we can't tolerate that. God says about our society today, our countenance witnesses against us. We declare our sins like they did in Sodom. We just want to declare it. We want to put it out there. Well, even Lot could have done a little bit more to stick to his convictions, his strong convictions. As you know, when those angels told him and his family they needed to get out, they lingered. And then the angels had to grab them by the hand and pull them out. If we're surrounded by it, it's just easy, isn't it, to cozy up to it a little bit, even if we're not directly involved in it. Mr. Armstrong made a statement in Mystery of the Ages, how that coming out of this, it's the greatest test we face, coming out of this world and the things of this world. What a test. We're surrounded by so much filth, so much lawlessness. We've certainly seen it in the political realm. Lawlessness. What about the Constitution? Here's this sham of an impeachment on Wednesday, and they broke all the rules leading up to that. And then you come out of it, and here's Nancy Pelosi changing the rules on the fly. She's just making it up as she goes. This was Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell yesterday as he just summarized some of the recent unconstitutional events. Clip 10.
So let's be clear. The House's vote yesterday was not some neutral judgment that Democrats came to with great reluctance. It was the predetermined end of a partisan crusade that began before President Trump was even nominated, let alone sworn in. For the very first time in modern history, we've seen a political faction in Congress promise from the moment a president election ended, that they would find some way to overturn it.
They've just been looking for the trigger the last 3 years. They decided from the moment he won that he was going to have to be impeached. And they finally found it. Well, they didn't even find it. Because what? Abuse of power? It's not even in the Constitution. An obstruction of Congress? Where are the high crimes? Where is the treason? Where's the bribery? It's certainly not in those articles of impeachment. As many have said and written, if this is the standard now, then every president in history could have easily been impeached. This is why they put it in the Constitution the way that they did, to prevent this sort of thing, this sort of abuse of power coming not from the executive branch, but from Congress. That's what we're witnessing. Kevin McCarthy, for his part, he's over in the House, the minority leader, and he brought up some important history straight out of Alexander Hamilton's Federalist Papers. This is clip 12.
In the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton wrote, there would always be the greatest danger that impeachment would be driven by partisan animosity instead of real demonstrations of innocence or guilt. That impeachment would be driven by partisan animosity instead of real demonstrations of innocence or guilt. James Madison, another author of the Federalist Papers, wrote, the danger of legislative abuse must lead to the same tyranny as is threatened by executive abuse. The founders did not want impeachment to be used for political or partisan battles.
So it's driven by partisan animosity. That's exactly what the founders feared. The House of Representatives, well, they are, I guess, closer to the people, voted in every 2 years, direct from their representative regions. And so the mob can get together in the House as well, but the Senate's supposed to be there to stop the mob behavior. So they've been waiting and waiting and waiting for the right moment. They do it finally this week. And of course, it was a real snoozer. There's more interest in President Trump's rally on Wednesday night in Michigan than there was in the impeachment proceedings. The hearing where every Democrat said the same thing, and frankly, every Republican too. Some are more eloquent than others. But it was just the same, and a party line vote, right down the line. Not one Republican. They couldn't get one Republican. Even the Republicans got a couple of Democrats. And then they get through to the end of this. The House, if we're to go by the Constitution, the House then passes the articles on to the Senate. And it's the Senate that conducts the trial. Not so, says Nancy Pelosi. She's going to withhold those articles for however long she needs to until the trial is arranged in just the right way. This is how she announced it, not so eloquently yesterday, clip 4.
Run the risk, as some Republicans have said, of looking like you're playing games with impeachment if you hold on to these articles for too long.
I said what I was going to say, Nancy. When we bring the bill, which is, just so you know, there's a bill made in order by the Rules Committee that we can call up at any time in order to send it over to the Senate and to have the provisions in there to pay for the impeachment, and then the next step, and the whatever you want to call it, the trial.
The trial. This is the woman that's trying to hold the White House and Congress, and really the United States of America, hostage. She's shredding the Constitution. There's a Republican in the White House. There's a conservative majority in the Supreme Court. The Republicans have the majority in the Senate. If you go beyond D.C., there's more Republican governors than there are Democrat. And then the Republicans are a majority in nearly 60% of the state legislatures. But this one party in one side of the Congress the House of Representatives, with a slim majority, trying to impose their will on the American people, on the White House, on Congress. She's now Speaker of the House and evidently the Senate Majority Leader as well. The trial has to be conducted in the way that she wants it to be. The Constitution says your part in this is over. As much of a sham as it was, okay, you voted for the articles of impeachment. Now you're done. Now it moves to the Senate. But see, the Senate's going to put an end to this nonsense, and they don't want it to end. This was their ace in the hole. This is what, after impeachment, what's left? Well, they want him out of office, and now they're out of options. So now they want to start with the evolving Constitution. Let's see what we can do. Let's see what we can do to force our will on this process. The president, of course, he's called this out repeatedly. This is what he said yesterday about the whole process of impeachment, clip 5.
What does it feel like to be the third president in U.S. history to be impeached?
Well, I don't feel like I'm being impeached because it's a hoax. It's a setup. It's a horrible thing they did. They happened to have a small majority, and they took that small majority, and they forced people. And, they said, I watched Pelosi out there saying, no, we don't want to talk to anybody. They put the arm on everybody. They tried to get them to do what they had to do. Many of those people were like Jeff, where they didn't want to vote that way. But it doesn't feel like impeachment. Last night I said it. We had a great time last night. The room was packed. Thousands of people couldn't get in. A section that really is a pretty much 50-50 section in terms of Democrat, Republican. We had, every one of those people is voting for Trump Pence, every one of them. And it's Michigan, an important state. We brought back tremendous amounts of business, tremendous car companies coming in, everything else. And I'll tell you, I was up there and I was thinking about it. I actually said it. It doesn't feel like impeachment. And you know what? It's a phony deal. And they cheapen the word impeachment. It's an ugly word, but they cheapen the word impeachment. That should never again happen to another president.
That's President Trump responding to the impeachment proceedings yesterday. It should never have happened. He talked about his rally in Michigan, that little city, Battle Creek, Michigan, a small town of 50,000 people. It's located about 50 miles southwest of Lansing. And people from all over Calhoun County, they got in line. I think the temperature in Fahrenheit was 18 degrees that morning, Wednesday morning. And they started lining up at 9 a.m. The rally was 7 p.m. that night. Now, it's a small community, so the arena was a little smaller than many of the ones President Trump speaks at. It holds about 5,500, 6,000 people, depending upon whatever the activity is or the event is. So the security apparatus, they let in 5,500 people that night. They turn away 2,000 in this little Michigan area, this little county, Calhoun County. And that's the way, as you've seen, if you have eyes to see and you can see a video screen, that's the way it's been for 4 years. Everywhere this man goes, people flock to him. Wherever he goes, there's large, boisterous crowds in attendance. And this is what his political opponents hate. This, among many other things, they hate the fact that he has such a loyal following. They thought all the way through this process that they would make him look so bad that finally, his base, women, whoever, would peel away from him. And they'd get the support that they needed in the House of Representatives, even in the Senate, and that they could remove him from office. And all of this has just backfired. Spectacularly so. So here they are down to impeachment. They've already used it. And I know there have been some that have said, well, we'll just impeach him again. But really, if nobody's listening, if nobody's interested with the first go-round, are they going to be tuning in if they impeach him again? They've used up all their ammunition. So what's left? Well, let's just rip the Constitution to shreds and see what we can come up with. We'll make stuff up along the way. All those Republican figures, state legislatures, Republicans in offices of governor, the Senate, the Supreme Court, the White House. This is a picture that shows the Democrats, the radical left, is being boxed in. And so they're reacting to that in desperation. Anything that they can do. Doesn't have to be in the Constitution. You'll recall just a few weeks ago, they were really big on the Constitution, the rule of law. We're just doing what the Constitution says. These are the same people who, as I read recently, they were right out there with the New York Times on the 1619 Project, that everything about America's founding is racist and evil. Old white men who own slaves. Why should we listen to them? And what a turn. What an abrupt turnaround. Now they want to uphold the rule of law, or they did a few weeks ago, and then yesterday, forget about the law, forget about what the Constitution says. This is the way they operate. You'll recall all through the impeachment, we've got to hurry. We've got to hurry. We've got to hurry. We've got to hurry. Donald Trump's a threat. He's a threat to our national security. This is an existential threat. We can't wait. We can't wait for some of these subpoenas to be sorted out in the courts. We've got to rush. We've got to rush through impeachment. And then they get what they want on Wednesday. Nobody's paying attention. And on Thursday, they say, well, now hang on a second. Let's hold up. Let's wait. We'll wait as long as we have to, they say, because they know they're not going to get what they want in the Senate. This is how they operate. And they're being exposed. They're being exposed at every turn. And it fits right in with what we've said on Jeroboam. Even before that, America under attack. You put that together with Great Again. What a powerful message. And then those articles along the way we did on the Nunes memo a year and a half ago, saving America from the radical left. Hopefully you're a subscriber, as I say here on the TV in the UK, to the Trumpet magazine. And hopefully you're devouring the message in that magazine. Well, a few other things I wanted to get into, but maybe I can save that for next week so we can save a little bit of time to finish off the week with a study. You're listening to Stephen Fleury, and this is the Trumpet Daily radio show. We'll be right back.
This is KPCG-FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Are we living in the last days? Some dismiss the notion as fanatical, but world leaders and news analysts are issuing warnings that are becoming more and more dire. Could Bible prophecies about the last days actually be accurate? Our brochure can help guide you through the relevant news and history and help you compare these events to what the Bible says. Are we living in the last days? This brochure is available for free right now at thetrumpet.com. Don't forget to visit our website at thetrumpet.com. Every day, thetrumpet.com will help you understand your world by analyzing today's headlines under the clear light of Bible prophecy. Log on to thetrumpet.com and sign up for our daily Trumpet Brief email and subscribe to the Trumpet magazine. From the Philadelphia Church of God campus in Edstone, England, this is the Trumpet Daily program with Stephen Fleury.
I've been going back to the foundation of this world for the last, I think, maybe 2 or 2.5 years, most of the time. And you can't understand it without going back to the foundation. It's the one thing that I'm afraid the church has been overlooking. I've said so many times, it's like coming into a movie when it's about 95% finished, and you don't know what went before, you don't know what events led up to what you're seeing in the movie now, and consequently you don't understand what's going on when you see the movie if you didn't see it from the beginning. The beginning always sets the foundation for the whole thing.
You have to go back to the foundation, Herbert Armstrong said back in 1983, and this week we've been doing that Monday and Tuesday on the program as we went through Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And in Genesis 2, of course, you have the Garden of Eden and the 2 trees, and God placed the man and then later his wife in that garden and offered him the tree of life and said to him, "Don't take from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day that you eat thereof, you will surely die." So God, in addition to being their creator and ruler, they were also educated by this great creator God. As I said earlier this week, God gave them all the essential knowledge that they needed. He gave them the instruction. He told them about the Sabbath. He instituted the union of marriage and family. And then he said, don't take from this one tree. Eat from the tree of life. The tree of life is wide open to you. And if you partake of that tree, you'll receive further instruction from God, revelation from God, spiritual power from God, life from God. So in chapter 3, God kept, to this point, he kept the devil away so that he could give the first man and the first woman some concentrated instruction. And then starting in chapter 3, God allows the devil to tempt them, and he targeted the woman. Satan did. It says in verse 1, "Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, which the eternal God had made. And he said to the woman, Yes, as God said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden." So he targeted her first, hoping to get her into a mindset where she didn't feel like she needed direction from her husband. I talked in the program earlier this week about the special help that God will give to the man, that God will give to the husband and the father if he seeks it. Because God wants to instill family government in that home, in that family, in that marriage. So she was out there on her own without her husband. And it says in verse 2, and entertaining this evil being, having a nice little conversation with Satan the devil. Verse 2, "And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said to the woman, You shall not surely die." He lied. He lied to her face. A bold, audacious lie. You see a lot of that in the world today. Where does that come from? That spirit. You're not going to die. You don't have anything to worry about. Verse 5 says, "For God does know that in the day that you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." Well, you'll be just like God. You'll be just like Elohim. He uses the same Hebrew word. Why do you need God's authority? Why do you need God's say-so? Why don't you just decide for yourself? Why should you subject yourself to a higher power? Look at you. Look at the mind you have. Look at the reasoning and the thinking that you can do, even as compared to the animals in the field. You are remarkable in and of yourself. You're holy. You're righteous. Even apart from God. So God had told them that they could die if they weren't obedient, and Satan comes along and says, hey, you're not going to die. You have an immortal soul. And people just look at the criticism the president gets this week, wondering about a Democrat politician who died, whether he's in heaven or hell. It's just, it's steeped into our thinking, whether Republican or Democrat. And people so offended by something based upon a false doctrine. The Bible says when you die, you're dead and buried. You return to the dust. All of us. But that thinking, oh, you're not going to die. You'll either go to heaven or you'll go to hell. That has persisted for 6,000 years. God outlined this purpose, this plan, that here's how you can be born into the God family. Satan comes along and says, who needs that? You're already God. Just do what you want to do. Verse 6, it says, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat. Adam just kind of meekly followed along. He didn't protest. He didn't want to make any waves. He didn't want to kick up a fuss. He didn't want to confront evil. You see examples like that. I mentioned Lot earlier, didn't I? He had some pretty good convictions. It's easy when we were talking about this in our Scrum meeting this morning, but even when you look at the evil in society today, now we've got to use wisdom, and we don't want to go, picking fights unnecessarily with Satan's minions. But look at Washington. And how is this, the thinking behind what Nancy Pelosi did yesterday, for example, how is that ever going to stop? Unless someone or some group or organization confronts it and says, no, this is what's going to happen because it's based upon the supreme law of the land. You can't play around with that. There is a matter of right and wrong. But you see what happens when we get away from our Judeo-Christian roots, when we get away from the founding documents, when you get away from the Constitution, constitutional law, it's just a free-for-all. Every man does what seems right in his own eyes. That's the way it was at the end of the period of the Judges, Judges 21, 25. Verse 6 here, it says, and when the woman saw, well, I read that. So she saw, hey, this is good. This tastes pretty good. I think this is healthy. I think this will work out. Proverbs 14:12, there's a way that seems right. Oh, this seemed right. It just seems perfect. But the end thereof are the ways of death. God actually repeats that in Proverbs 16. That memory verse in Proverbs 14:12. He repeats it. Now you think about all the Proverbs that Solomon wrote. I forget, First Kings 4 maybe it is, where it said he's produced thousands and thousands. And we've got, if we can go just by that figure, I think we've got about a third of them that God saw fit to canonize. So not all of them made it into Scripture, but the ones that made it in, of those, 2 of them say exactly the same thing. God was pretty selective, in other words. He put just the best ones in there, but on that one, he repeated it. He said it again. There's a way that seems right, but the end thereof are the ways of death. You better be careful going along just thinking, well, this sure must be the way. Surely this seems like the way to go. What does God say? That's what he wants. That's what he was teaching them in the Garden of Eden. Look, here are two trees, and if you take from this other one, the one I've commanded you not to, it may seem like the way to go. It may seem like it's not going to harm you, but it will. It does. Always, always, always. Now, even the Bible in Hebrews 11 says that sin is pleasurable for a season. It feels good for a short time, but what happens when the boomerang hits? Well, that's what we're seeing happen across our society. There may be some short-term political gain. I think there has to be, because there's so many people in America who are furious. And you see it in the numbers of people that turn out for those rallies. And even spending wildly, printing off dollars, borrowing because it's cheap to borrow. There's some short-term gain, some political gain, for sure. But what about the longer term? And even with respect to all of this impeachment drama, it's easy, if you're a conservative, to point out the flaws and the gross misconduct and the unconstitutional behavior and think that, well, we'll sure get them next election. Just you wait and see. We're going to get a House majority, and then finally we're going to be able to do everything that we want. It may help politically, but what is it doing to our society, our nation, our Constitution, our supreme law? Louis Gohmert, the House representative from Texas, he gave in his short speech on Wednesday during the impeachment hearings. This is what he said, clip 6.
This is a travesty, and we're in big trouble because Schumer was right. Now it's lowered even farther, the bar. It will be used for political battles, and this country's end is now in sight. I hope I don't live to see it. This is an outrage. I yield back.
Pretty sobering warning there from Mr. Gohmert. The country's end is in sight, and I hope I don't live to see it. As several wrote, it was in the news stack we had yesterday. Now that you can lower the bar this low for impeachment, well, it's just going to happen every time, won't it? If time were to go on long enough, where does it stop? Short-term game politically, but what about the long-term health and well-being of our nation? There's a way that seems right, but how does it end? Well, they both took from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Adam and Eve, and then verse 22, here's the action that God took. It says, and the eternal God said, behold, the man is become as one of us, or he's taken on the prerogative, the godly prerogative of deciding for himself what's right and wrong, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever, therefore the eternal God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. This is the action God took after Adam effectively said, I reject you and your authority. I reject your government ruling over me. I reject your revelation. And so God said, all right, then I sentence you to 6,000 years of being cut off from the tree of life, cut off from divine revelation, cut off from God's family government, cut off from the truth. And what's important for us to take away from this foundational knowledge is that our present civilization, our nations that sprung from what happened here in the Garden of Eden, This is the foundation. This is how it all started. It goes back to Adam and Eve and their rejection, their flat-out rejection of God's government. And that's why, in looking over the world as it is today, God says that Satan is the god of it, and the world in and of itself is evil through and through. We declare our sin as Sodom. Well, there's a lot of positive instruction in the book of Genesis as well. And really, when you understand the truth, if God's opening your mind to it, there's a lot to take away from even this third chapter. The course for human civilization was set, but if your mind, if God is working in your mind, opening your mind to the truth, you can actually partake of the tree of life now, today, as opposed to later when the government of God is set up all over the earth. We're out of time. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week.